Είμαστε στην πολύ ευχάριστη θέση, στο πάνελ το οποίο ακολουθεί, να συζητήσουμε για ένα πολύ ενδιαφέρον θέμα, θα έλεγα κρίσιμο θέμα, με έναν πολύ σημαντικό συνομιλήτη, έναν από τους keynote speakers σήμερα.
Interlocutor, one of our keynote speakers, Μαργαρίτης Σχοινάς, Vice President of the European Commission. And so we are delighted to have him here. Of course, no need for further introductions for Mr. Schionas. This is true in Greece, in the European Union, and so no need to provide you with any details on his CV. He is well-known Mαργαρίτης Σχοινάς in our country, across Europe, and of course in the world, with a portfolio, amongst other things, which seems to embrace everything, the norms, the values, the principles, which are at the very basis of our European living and which is cross-cutting. Equally interesting, though, is the very content of the discussion we shall have, which I'd like to remind you is Europe of security, from the era of naivety to geopolitical self-confidence. This is a quite interesting title, which, by the way, sets the framework of the discussion we shall have. This was the case this morning. Again, so after a brief introduction, the keynote speaker will make a presentation, will deliver a speech, and then we will have some time by 3 o'clock for a Q&A session. So allow me to say that the concept, the notion of safety and security is much more complicated, much more complex and multifaceted as against some years ago, in the sense that, traditionally speaking, security is more clear. Today's concept of security, that is a holistic, comprehensive security, as it were, is a much more complex concept which embraces many more activities, including soft power, energy security, and of course also human movements, displacements, migration, etc. It also important to acknowledge that the journey from the era of naivety to geopolitical self-confidence has not always been easy. I mean, the European Union has not always had self-confidence. And when I kept traveling for many years to the US, I remember observing, noting the different stance of the European Union from an economic entity to something which gradually started stirring the American creativity, sometimes even reservation. So the journey from the era of naivety to geopolitical self-confidence is, as we all know, a journey which, because of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia on February 24th, 2022, has changed. And it is a journey which in the past also experienced difficult and sometimes even complex conjuncture: invasion in Georgia in 2008, Crimea in 2014. I'm thinking how the European strategic autonomy, to use this buzzword indeed, has increased because of these challenges we are here to discuss. Let me remind you, though, that there have been stimuli to intensify any geopolitical self-confidence of the European Union coming from the Euro-Atlantic world. And I'm thinking of the Trump period. Of course, my intention is not to level any criticism on the Trump administration right now. It concerns more the Americans and much less our panel. However, it goes without saying that the initial uncertainty led to some kind of pressure, some thoughts. I mean, if we assume that the US would rather achieve decoupling from Europe, how what will or how the European future will be like. So often there have been stimuli within the Euro-Atlantic world which have led Europe to think in the Euro-Atlantic framework, the idea of achieving a much more comprehensive strategic autonomy. I have mentioned this new notion, comprehensive notion of security, which has to do with management of human migration, how we intend to use the soft power to promote the role of Europe. All that, of course, touch upon European security. I would like also to add that there are some aspects of the traditional approach which are of interest today. For example, often there's an argument from the US that when it comes to the burden sharing of defense between allies, many European countries are left behind. Germany is one of those, and this is not a secret, of course, today. The fact that Germany is trying to enhance its defense standing is something that we in the Euro-Atlantic world, of course, welcome. However, the burden sharing and similar concepts need to be important to matter when we talk about other aspects of security, as, for example, the correct or the appropriate management of migration flows. Here again, we need a burden sharing within the European Union. By consequence, I believe that the concept of security is critical today, is multifaceted, has many, many layers and aspects, and it is difficult to systematically think of ways that this concept may activate all actions together. I mean, by definition, this is a process, a lengthy process, and so it will require time for us to meet the objective that is geopolitical self-confidence. And certainly very few people in Europe would have the same possibility to address this issue. In Europe, one of them is, for sure, the Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Mαργαρίτης Σχοινάς, who has a thorough knowledge in these matters. This is known to the public opinion, of course, not only to us. And of course, this is known to this audience, made up of students, and for all of us who know, who are familiar of the work of Mαργαρίτης Σχοινάς. Certainly, we firmly believe that Mαργαρίτης Σχοινάς is one of the few people that can touch upon, can discuss effectively the role of Europe in this complex reality. Let us not forget that the role of the European Union in security has experienced difficult times, but certainly, according to many thinkers, may set the framework. There are many practices and arguments by people who argue that it is so important for Europe to continue along the path of normativity, while, of course, also enhancing its geopolitical self-confidence. Having said that, I would like to give the floor to Mαργαρίτης Σχοινάς, who is kindly requested to come here to the podium, and of course we will have some time for Q&A session at the end. Thank you.
President Jurida.
Professors, dear friends, I am delighted to be here with you in the proceedings of the Athens Security Forum this afternoon. No doubt, European security, the topic you have been discussing, is at the core of current affairs and the political agenda as well. Especially today, a symbolic day, an important day, because today it is 9 months from the beginning of this illegal war of the Russian invader in Ukraine. And frankly, this war is not only an utter violation of international law, is not only the return of war on a continent which twice experienced in the past century similar conflicts. It is especially a threat, not against security, but a threat against the social paradigm we represent as European Union at the very core of the Western civilization's principles. That is the democratic model, the democratic paradigm of a society which, to us, is a matter of pride. For the attacker, the invader, is a strategic threat. And I am very happy to see here many young people, young Greek citizens, European citizens, here in this hall, because this war concerns you. It is a war which should remind you that even in the European Union, nothing should be taken for granted. And it is a war happening only 30 years after the war in Yugoslavia, 50 years after the Turkish invasion in Cyprus, and 60, 70 years, respectively, from the Soviet invasion in Prague and Budapest. These are anniversaries which are important for the young generations of Europeans, not anniversaries that you should Google to understand how important they were. They are the very roots of the democratic social value paradigms which have been guiding our societies in Europe. Now, this dark page of war, and now I'm addressing you in my capacity as a European official, so is to be added on top of a sequence of multiple crises we have been experiencing in Europe over the past years. We had the debt crisis, the first invasion of Russia to Crimea, the migration and refugee emergency in 2015, the pandemic, Brexit, terrorism, the jihadist terrorism, and so on and so forth. So in these 13 years, from 2009, the very rule that has been guiding European politics, the term which better characterizes the landscape in which we have been operating, is the word permacrisis. I'm not sure whether you know that the term permacrisis has been declared, has been announced by the Harper's Dictionary, the word of the year. And this is something very well known to the Greek public, of course. So this term is setting the backdrop of what we have been discussing here, especially in the European continent, especially if you look back and you see that the only period free of crisis, the only period smooth interval was a very brief period of time after the situation normalized at the beginning of 2016, after the migration emergency, to Brexit. Now, when it comes to the von der Leyen Commission, which took office in December 2019, in the roughly 3 years we have been in office as commissioners, the only calm period was 3 months. December 1st, 2019, mid-March 2020. when the first quarantine, the first lockdown started. Now, I'm saying that just to understand that discussion and debate on security of Europe certainly goes beyond external or internal security. It also touches upon the resilience of European societies against powerful, profound, consequent crises and threats which are disrupting to us all and concerns us all. Now, the first conclusion to be drawn in the framework of this perma-crisis period is that, indeed, Europe was indeed disrupted, but did not collapse as a result of that crisis. So it has proven much more resilient than what many friends who were expecting and many enemies were hoping. So for the first time in history, maybe because of these very threats, Europe took initiatives, have taken unprecedented initiatives and took unprecedented steps. The debt crisis of 2009-2010 found Europe utterly unprepared, without a legal basis, without resources, without institutions. And thanks to the unique sacrifices of our citizens, we managed to keep Euro alive, to create European mechanisms to promote a burden sharing of debt and to maintain competitiveness of the Euro. The same unprecedented measures were taken also in the wake of the war. Since February 24th, for the first time in the European history, we have activated the temporary protection status for more than 6 million Ukrainian refugees who have been granted immediate and unconditional access to our labor market, to the educational system, to our hospitals, and to our societies. For the first time, we have the European Peace Facility, so European funds which belong to the European taxpayers, to purchase weapons for a third country, that is Ukraine. For the first time, we have provided Ukraine with 19 billion euro macroeconomic assistance for a pledge for an additional 22 billion next year. So this macroeconomic assistance support is what has been allowing the Ukrainian people to fight for its independence. Ukraine is fighting because the European Union is financing the operation of the Ukrainian state. The same we did to uphold and to protect our institutions against cyber threats. And also, in another important issue, that is critical infrastructure, which also is of interest, of course, to our citizens. We need to shield, to protect our critical infrastructure against known or unknown threats. No need, of course, to explain to you how deleterious was the sabotage of the Nord Stream 2 and other cables. It's very important indeed to protect our critical infrastructure because they are part of what we call as the European security acquis. Now, the second conclusion we may draw in the wake of this perma-crisis period is that Europe, and this is the title I have given this panel, is that Europe steadily, slowly, but steadily passes from the era of naivety, no problem to use that term, to an era of self-confidence, so increased certainty. Let us be frank. For many decades in Europe, we have been living in an ivory tower. We had no problem whatsoever not building masks or ventilators in Europe. And why should we when we could afford importing them from China or India? Or the fact that the raw materials for our industry came from China. Or it was no problem for us to receive low-cost energy from Russia through at relatively low cost, having the illusion that we had to do with partners, with just providers. But it took the pandemic to understand that if you do not have masks and ventilators, then you depend on who does build them. The pandemic made us decide to build a vaccine creation industry, a mobility certificate to create the RRF, which we did not have. And now, in the case of energy, to steadily stop relying and depending on powers which we considered bona fide providers or partners, but who have viewed energy as a weapon, which they instrumentalize, they weaponize not to affect and to attack the government, but to attack the vulnerable, the household. This is eloquent as to the complexity of the threat we are called upon to address as Europeans. This transition of Europe from the age of innocence and naivety to self-confidence goes without saying, is clear, and this is said by someone who experienced the first phase and now is experiencing the second one. So this is reality, this is happening. However, it will not be as quick as is expected. So it will not be spectacular, let's say. A series of measures and steps need to be taken upon political will and convergence, and this will take time. I mean, do not expect this transition to be dramatic, to be spectacular, to be instant. If there's a sector in which this process is more visible, is of course European defense. Indeed, when it comes to the European defense is positively based on a direction we have traced. We as Europeans understand that we have to coordinate our research in the defense industry. We need to orchestrate, to coordinate procurement. I mean, Europeans cannot purchase whatever is produced, no matter where on this globe, and then think how this defense material may meet our needs. We need to coordinate the significant resources for the first time earmarked by the European budget, and what we need to coordinate especially is our ability as Europeans to step into, to intervene when our strategic interests are under threat, they are jeopardized. I'm not sure I am provoking this noise, says the speaker.
Αν ψάχνατε λοιπόν ένα
And so, as I was saying, we need to find as Europeans the ability to coordinate ourselves when our interests are jeopardized. And to provide you with an example, let me remind you of last August, after the announcement of the withdrawal of the American troops from Afghanistan in the airport of Kabul. that August in the Kabul airport, when needed to get out of Afghanistan, the citizens of the Western citizens and citizens of the European Union, and of course all our partners there. The Americans, with 3,000 Marines, managed in just a week, in only a week, to take out of the country both the American nationals, American citizens, who cooperated with them. We as Europeans, if I'm not wrong, we had 8 national troops in the airport, every one of which would try to take its own people out of the borders. We had no one, for example, so we needed to agree with the Finnish, and the Finnish needed to agree with someone else, etc. I'm using that argument just to laugh on that, on the failure of Europe, of the biggest market in the world, the second most important currency, which managed to buy vaccines, etc. That very Europe finds it so difficult to coordinate in such a delicate moment as is the evacuation of the Kabul airport. And as a consequence, we already have taken the decision within the strategic compass to set up these rapid reaction forces, and I believe that in the next year there will be some kind of a preliminary European rapid reaction force which will be able to step in. It will be made up of 5,000 soldiers, and they will intervene in similar occasions. Now, in order to leave some time for a Q&A session, allow me just to add a couple of things. An important point is that Europe, do you prefer me to be seated? Hoping that this noise will just stop. Hopefully this is not a hybrid threat. The speaker is joking. Now, of course, I apologize for this noise, although it's not because of me. Hopefully it will stop, says the speaker. Now, before I wrap up with my initial speech and to leave some time to discuss with you, Mr. Lavdas anticipated that. I believe that when we discuss European citizens' security, we need to go beyond the borders or the boundaries of security as we know it, as we view it, that is the external security and the homeland, as our friends Americans call it, cybersecurity, that is counter-terrorism, counter-organized crime, money laundering, and so on and so forth. So European citizens' security needs to have all these characteristics: external, internal, touch upon cybersecurity, counterterrorism, etc. But at the same time, it needs to be able to mobilize when necessary, when required, all the tools and instruments provided by the Treaty of the European Union: trade, sanctions, import, duties, standards. So the end of the age of innocence entails the end of an age of a Europe which is generous in giving, but finds it difficult to take, to receive, and also presupposes the abolishment of the several silos, which instead of cooperating, interacting, competing one against the other. And there are similar construction sites, as it were, in Europe. Allow me to conclude with 3 observations, 3 remarks that will be decisive as to the European security, and they may sound surprising to you. First, energy. Energy is a strategic competition sector. It is an area which resembles more to a weapon than to a ground of cooperation. It is a section of political action in which the ability of Europe to be independent and self-sufficient will be tested. They started with the effort to stop being dependent on the Russian fossil fuels. A critical aspect is being discussed this afternoon in Brussels by the Ministers of Energy, who for the first time are called upon to decide upon a proposal the Commission presented last week on a ceiling for natural gas. So for the first time, Europe will have a ceiling-like shield against speculators and all those who threaten us. And this corrective mechanism, the reduction of demand, the reliable energy providers from third countries are just parts of a mosaic which has to do with our security and needs to encompass other things as well, including, and this will materialize, I have no doubt about that, the common energy procurement by Europe instead of a procurement at the national level, according to terms and conditions, of course, which are less attractive. So if we manage to build this resilient and independent Europe, certainly we will enhance not only our economy, but especially our security. And this will touch upon our relations with our neighbors and also whatever has to do with research in maritime zones, which, as you know, is a matter of international law, not community law. However, to have such a European energy identity will have a direct impact on security for European citizens. Second critical sector, the migration issue. We have experienced over the past years 3 unprecedented geopolitical junctures when 3 leaders of Europe have instrumentalized this emergency to affect Europe. The first in 2020 in Evros, second in Ceuta, the Spanish sea team located in the north of Spain, and third in September last year, August or September, from the latest dictatorship of Europe, which organized Belarus that is, which organized an unprecedented campaign to allow refugees to move through Minsk to Europe. In all these 3 cases, the European Union has proven very efficient, effective to stop those threats at the external borders. In the case of Belarus, to even stop the 10th flight from other transit countries, to organize the returns of those people suffering who were victims of that instrumentalization. And now we do have a know-how to address this crisis, but this is, of course, no remedy for the issues against our security. We need to come up with an efficient and effective framework for asylum and migration that will rely on the principle that our external borders will be safe and will be guarded, not only for the countries which are located across the external borders, but will be collectively guarded by Europe through a Frontex, which will have by the end of next year its own aircraft, 10,000 standing corps, and the only agency of the European Union which will be armed and will have uniforms with the emblem of the European Union. This is, therefore, an effort through this migration issue to enhance security and to deter any thinking of people to instrumentalize the situation.
And third point, critical but not self-obvious, not obviously connected to security, is the fact that we can empower the monetary union and euro. Many would say that here we are to talk about security, not about economics. But I believe that a powerful financial and monetary union and a powerful euro undoubtedly are linked deeply to a powerful identity of defense. Having the second reference currency, the word, if you have federalized your monetary and financial policy, these are deterrent factors vis-a-vis all those who stupidly believe that it is simple to threaten the Eurozone. That it is a simple thing to create an incident at a point of Eurozone, creating a financial tsunami throughout the world. We have a duty to work for a powerful monetary union, for a powerful euro as a shield of protection. And for that reason, some days ago, we tabled a new proposal that modifies significantly the limitations of the Stability Pact. That is, it lifts this cross-cutting dimension of the previous Stability Pact with the same targets for all member states. It individualizes and we customize different objectives by abolishing the monolithic approach that existed in the past, by giving more fiscal space to the states members of the Eurozone to act as adults, not as minors that should be learned a lesson by Brussels or by Frankfurt. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, this is how I portray Europe of security, a Europe that will not just be a very popular and likable one, but it will be a power to measure necessary. Nobody will take it for granted, but it should be respected by all. And this Europe, we have a duty to build not just for us, not just for young generations. It is our duty to build it as a matter of defense vis-a-vis all these forces, the forces that are Euroscepticists, both to the far right and to the far left of the political scenery. These forces need to convince us that the best solutions of security lie within national isolation, lack and borders. The better defense of Europe is Europe itself. Thank you. Thank you deeply, Vice President of the European Commission. Thank you, Mr. Schoonas, for this quite concise approach of yours, which indeed was about the very critical aspects that we wanted to listen about, and some other aspects that we didn't expect to listen. I believe that there will be many important questions. This was the source of the problem. We found it. Problem solved. Okay. Glad to listen to that. Okay, so I believe that we can have very interesting questions. Instead of using my hat as a moderator to raise the first question, I will do something else. I will seize this opportunity in order to ask from young people, students, to take the floor. We have students in a master's degree or before the master's degree. I would like to give them the floor and see some hands. Well, looking to my partners, I believe that we'll have half an hour, not just a quarter. Yes, half an hour, even better, 30 minutes for Q&A. So many questions to take. I propose the following. Let's first take 2 or 3 questions, reply, and so on and so forth. I saw one hand, second hand. Yes, you have the floor, madam, please. But please do use a microphone, please. Thank you.
Καλησπέρα.
Hello. I would like to ask you, what is your approach when it comes to the development of the development of different texts from European strategy to global strategy in 2016 and now in the strategic compass of 2022? That is, do you believe that these texts meet the demands of the EU? Is there something lacking here? Is there any prediction about annual reports to see where we stand? Thank you. Thank you. I wonder whether this question should be replied before moving on, because it is of particular importance and it can be examined separately. What do you think? Yes, I do agree, but I'm not pretty sure that my reply is the one that matches this audience, because I believe that the audience and the members of the academia have a trend to overestimate these institutional texts. I don't fall under this category. I don't belong to the category of people who believe that these texts are a panacea or that they open the gates to this new Europe of decisiveness. These are useful texts, I agree. Well, look, they are useful texts because they allow, amidst the complexity of people, institutions, bodies involved, to focus on a specific matter. But the texts do not follow Hamilton's perspective. And I'm saying so. I have monitored and I have contributed to many out of those. I am against the institutional fetishism. If these texts were the ones needed to have the Europe of security, we would already have it. We wouldn't need more texts. But since we're talking about the compass, this aspect has an added value, because without it, we couldn't have had the rapid intervention force. If we assume that this link will be done, then this text at least did the job. Apologies for my heretic reply, but I'm trying to be frank here. Thank you. So we can move on after this very interesting reply and question, then to the lady and then to the other person at the back. Yes, you. You can have the microphone. Thank you. Hello. I would like to make a question to the Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Schοινάς. You mentioned before that the Russian President has instrumentalized energy to be able to threaten Europe. So my question is the following. Monitoring the issue through the press, shouldn't we talk about the position of the former Chancellor, Madame Merkel, who signed some contracts of energy with Russia in the past, and she guaranteed before everyone that there will be no threat coming from Russia? What about Germany? Did Germany fall in this energy trap set by the Russian president? This is my question. Thank you. And the reply is quite simple. Yes, you are absolutely right. This is right. The German Chancellor, the former German Chancellor, who for many, many reasons has proven her skills to be a leader in critical moments in Europe, or at least to create the critical mass of political support for difficult decisions in Europe, in this issue, she failed. And this failure was the failure that even Germany has to undergo now. And with Germany, us as well. We must be frank when it comes to different moments. The example that you mentioned is included what I said before of this end of naivety. We do not produce ventilators or oxygen masks in Europe. Okay, no problem. We get them somewhere. The same goes with energy. It was a German perception that energy is not a problem. We have the Russians and they can provide it to us. But this was reversed in real life. And this whole effort, to which I alluded, that is the energy independence, steps on that. It steps on this strategic error. It steps on this problem that we are trying to leave behind. Thank you. So we have two questions. Let us take two questions together. One hand over there, towards the back of the room. Yes, yes. And then the other person there to the right. Please.
Αυτό.
Δεν πάμε άσχημα στην εξάρτηση τεχνολογία.
Έχει ένα κουμπάκι από...
Yes, there is a button. Please switch it on. Switch the microphone on. You're right.
Θέλω να σας ρωτήσω αμφότερους.
I would like to ask you both. What is your view when it comes to the development of the war in Ukraine? Because after the annexation of the 4 areas, there is the Ukrainian counterattack and further escalation. One view about it. And then, secondly, we have opened again the debate, the proposal that is to create a pan-European army in the framework of tackling threats. Your views about these two issues. Thank you. And mainly, and possibly rather, we can take the next question. Yes, please. What's the next question? Hello. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. My question is a follow-up. You told us that this is the end of the era of naivety for Europe. But we see Germany, in spite of the fact that even itself and other countries are paying this error of the energy dependence on Russia, the actual chancellor insists on a continuation of trade relationships with China, whereas risks are quite clear. May we talk about the end of naivety or not? And to what extent Europe may truly be independent, having this close relationship with China? And to follow up, is this a viable option just to have as an ally the US? Because this is the alternative, I imagine. Thank you. Yes, yes, I will take the easy part. I will take the easy part.
Δεν συμφωνούν. Λοιπόν, ξεκινάω και μετά συνεχίζουμε μέσα στο πλαίσιο του χρόνου. Είναι πράγματι θέματα που χρειάζονται.
Yes, yes, I agree, because this could take us 2 hours to reply. Let us clarify three points.
Γνωρίζουμε κατεξοχήν.
We can all acknowledge, and even the texts are very interesting, talking about many different poles and things that are not created in China. Europe is talking about different poles. We don't accept unipolarity. So Europe does know that West is not the whole planet, of course. If we see demographics, the planet is India, China, China, India, and then the other parts and the other countries. This is acknowledged by Europe by definition, but I believe that we are in a phase of transition during which these many different poles that is erroneously merged with China or India, it will find a new balance and a way to move on. Of course, it is a problem trying to add a reply to the previous question. Of course, it is a problem to continue war and Russia to become more and more a marginalized country, a country that Russia depends on China these days. And then there are more problems apart from this dependence related to sanctions, related to the turmoil in the world economy, etc. So, point one. It is clear that Europe is, par excellence, a region of ideas and action, as demonstrated in the past. It does not believe that West is a panacea, the center of the universe. This does not mean that we shall accept any prior decisions, and that is why the fact that we should condemn Russia was necessary. When the message was not conveyed to Russia upon the annexation of Crimea, we should be very specific. But on the other hand, as long as the war is in force, there are some new data that have been shaped. In this era of multipolarity, it is of the interest of none for the West to catch up with time, it's for the interest of none for the West to get a second or third role. No, the West should play its own role, which is a regulatory one. This is what we need to believe. It's not just a trade or financial role, and secondly, we should start tackling the different partners in a separate way, always with due respect. Of course, a big partner of Europe is India, which has a past with the non-aligned forces in different historic courses, but Europe should face different partners in a way that should respect everybody. Coming to the end of this quick reply to two very good questions, I believe that we must remember that there's always a very delicate line. When should we take the decision? When is the moment to negotiate, to consult? When is the moment for the end of the war phase? Consequently, and coming to the end of the first question, I would say that for the last 2 months I have been arguing that it is high time we ended with a war. But this first depends on Russia and to an extent on Ukraine, that is on all of us. When this delicate line can be reached, it is a moving target, but it is to the benefit of Europe, undoubtedly, first, to learn the lesson that we cannot accept any fixed decisions, but secondly, we must also get into negotiations when conditions allow us to do so, so that this line could not become too excessive and thus talk about consequences that are not wanted. I hope that we come closer to this phase of a more generalized negotiation. There are some indicators, even if we consider that to exist also in March. This is my first quick reply. Yes, I don't disagree. As bullet points, let me answer. The development of the war, I don't know. It's difficult to read a system in Moscow which doesn't work with characteristics of a Western political system. We're talking about a closed system which is legalized by different intelligence services, a system that has no public opinion to face, has no independent media, there's no civil society. Such a system cannot be read easily. And the strategic threat of the touched by fate mums, because these mums do not dwell in Moscow, they dwell in different areas of the Federation, so it's not obvious, this image of mourning moms. So the system cannot be easily interpreted. The first conclusion is that the war did not justify the attacker. On the contrary, historically, morally, it justified the defender. Another war where the defender has better chances than the attacker. And another conclusion was what Mr. Lauda said. Now there should be high time for negotiation, but negotiation time will come, as always in these negotiations, when there will be a certainty of the following certainty. With whom are you going to negotiate? Because a golden rule of negotiations is that you cannot negotiate the same thing with two different interlocutors. Negotiations should take place with the one that could be committed, and this reply is not that clear yet. Now, European army, yes, there will be a European army. But let me inform you that the different divisions of von der Leyen and the brigades of Juncker are not ready to start tomorrow morning. There will be, in long run, such a development as an evolution, as a development of all these procedures we're talking about, that is, convergence and common mindset that since threats are the same, symmetric ones, then defense should be of a similar type. Personally speaking, since I have many contacts with the staff both in Greece and in the European Union, I'm pretty happy when I see that this convergence is already taking place. There is this common perception, there is partnership, but yet I'm looking at Mr. Arvanitopoulos. This does not create any conditions according to Hamilton. It will not be any big bang, but we will get there. Now, another point. China, yes, indeed, we need much time for the discussion. What I can tell you is that we, as Europe, always, and I leave European politics for the last 30 years, but we have always followed a golden principle. The interest of Europe is, in English it's better, a rules-based international order, which is a bit different from multipolarity, because multipolarity might exist, but they cannot necessarily be rules-based. We need such an international scene that will be based on rules in trade, security, the environment. Let me here tell you that this is what we want, but many times we felt lonely in this commitment of ours, especially during the Trump administration. We felt desperately lonely. As a representative of the European Commission, now let me share a personal experience with you. Let me give you a personal view. I participated in the period 2014-2019 in all the different summits of G7 and G20 where the president of the Commission participates. It was the Trump administration era. I should tell you that the remaining one, that is Australians, Japanese, Brazilians, the remaining were the Canadians even. They came to us telling us, luckily you exist. Luckily you exist. This commitment overcomes a relationship with China, a relationship with India, because if we build such a rules-based system for international order that will be rooted on conditions and principles and rules, then we will do better with everybody. Yes, so this normativity is very important with many different aspects. Any other question, please? Yes, the last round. Don't threaten us, come on. Yes, we already have many threats in our mind. So 3 questions to finish with them. Hello, thank you so much for your speech. I would like to ask you the following. You said that European security may not be based on walls or on fences, and you mentioned the migration crisis. Let me ask you, what is the institutional role of the Union to tackle these flows at the first place? That is, in the countries of origin, and what does the EU do? In theater, we saw that there were people from West Africa. What is the presence of Union, not just in countries like Syria or Afghanistan, for instance, but also in countries that send migrants? And then I would also like to learn more institutionally what's the reaction of the Commission when countries like Poland and Greece are facing problems with migration, and when they opt for pushback conditions. How do you tackle these violations of international law? Yes, another question from here, 3rd row. And the 3rd question to wrap it up. Yes. Hello, thank you very much for your speech, which was very interesting. I have attended other speeches from the European Parliament. In 2001, I was at the European Parliament because I had a stage, and I was happy enough to prepare some fact sheets. Ever since 2001, we were prepared, and I was responsible for the relations between EU, the US, and third countries on the energy problem that, at the end of the day, turned to be crisis. By crisis, we're not talking about the institutional social crisis, but of course we're talking about an energy crisis. Ever since we have analyzed how a country, how should I put it, how an ensemble of countries, that is the EU, can have the proper means, socially, politically, institutionally, all these together, so that it can truly be independent. And then we observe in 2022 that what we had started back then as a research in the DG research, when I conducted this study, that Greece, for sure Greece, which strategically is at a crossroad, can be a pioneer, it can be independent energy-wise, and can also be a part of the solution of the problem. That shouldn't be a problem normally, because ever since we have seen that through a study and can be finalized positively. Now, when it comes to Ukraine, last Friday, was lucky enough under the aegis of the European Commission in the American College. I attended a very good fashion show on children from Ukraine. It was very interesting. They said something very, very important, which I keep. They said that the war would end quickly. Maybe we are close to a positive result, so I'm looking forward to your own replies. Thank you so much. Yes, okay, let us wrap it up with these two questions. The first one is related to my portfolio in the Commission. You are asking me about the role of Europe. The idea on migration is like a building with 3 floors. The first floor should be about the relationships with the countries of origin, with the transit countries. We will never manage to tackle migration internally in Europe if we do not manage it with our neighbors. Second store, we said before, security of the external borders. There will be no migration policy in Europe if we don't have powerful and safe borders. Third floor, the allocation of burden and solidarity. All for one and one for all, not few for the many. What's the problem up to now? We have on the table this proposal since September 2020, but the member states, for the time being, want to get the elevator and only visit the floor they are interested in. That is, first liners go to the 3rd floor directly, and they are saying we want solidarity and allocation of burden. The countries of admission just go to the 1st, 2nd floor, and they are saying if we have less arrivals and a powerful control at the borders, why should we talk about solidarity? Maybe we won't need it. They have made quite clear, and your question allows me to repeat it, that this building will be built at the same time with all three floors ready-made with the same capacity of bearing loads. There will be no emergency exit. Everybody will participate in the same way, especially when it comes to the transit countries and the country of origin. We have failed, especially with Africa. We have given away too much money. We're the biggest donor in the world, but our money did not deliver. They went to the elites. We've built presidential manos in Africa, airports, motorways. The majority of those were built due to European constructing companies which get the money back. This should change. The EU money in Africa should build opportunities for the people, for the youngsters to have a better life there, enhance the borders of these countries. And these are the characteristics of the 1st floor. Now, when it comes to pushbacks, the situation is quite simple. Pushbacks cannot be perceived in the framework of this building. When this building operates, there is no room for pushbacks. When you listen about this phenomena, this is exactly because we are in transition phase where the European building is under construction. And let me come to the end with Greece. The final question gives me the opportunity to say something that I should have said. Greece, indeed, is an EU member state, which is fortunate enough to see through it and to deal with many different constituents of security. This is not a problem. This is a tactical advantage, because here in our country we can see not just the geopolitical fence, the limit that we can reach this point, and from that point onwards we're talking about different things, but here we can have on the same soil the energy pipelines. We are the part of Europe that is closer to the moment that the Arab world will give the cable to Europe. We are the ones that will lay hand first on that cable. Then migration. The success of Europe in migration largely is judged from the Greek seas and a big victory in Evros verified this momentum. I shall never forget the people from the villages in Evros who went out from their houses during this weekend, and they gave a big round of applause for the forces of Frontex. Generations of Greeks were raised to learn that our borders, Greek borders, are the borders of the EU. During that weekend, this was demonstrated. So we should all work so that these tactical advantages in our country that set us in an unprecedented good conjuncture after so many decades to be used adequately. Thank you so much for your attention.